Bilingual Redditors, what have you heard that you weren't supposed to? Story 1. I speak primarily English, but my family comes from a bilingual French part of the province, New Brunswick. So many of my family members communicate in French primarily. During one visit to my grandparents' house, I was looking over the shoulder of my cousin as she wrote a note to one of her friends. This would have been over 10 years ago now, if memory serves, so it wasn't very common for school-aged kids to have phones and text each other. Anyway, she made no effort to hide her note from me because she didn't know I could read French. She was writing about me and my brother, writing that I was annoying. Her exact wording was "men et le tunnel," and she wrote that my brother was cute. So I proved her right in judging me as annoying by abruptly shouting out, "Hey, I'm not that annoying. And you think my brother is cute? That's gross. He's your cousin." Priceless reaction. Story 2. Not me, but I have a story to share. When I was in middle school, there was a group of kids, like 3 or 4 of them, who would sit in the back of the class and speak Creole, chatting and laughing, but nobody could understand what they said. The teacher would tell them to stop speaking in Creole since she couldn't know if they were saying something offensive, which was usually met with them saying something to each other in an obviously mocking manner, and then the whole group breaking out in laughter. So one day, this guy shows up in the class. He says that he's training to be a teacher and he's going to be shadowing the class that day. So he's sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, jotting things down in a notebook. Of course, the Creole-speaking kids were chatting away as usual. So the guy gets up out of the chair and walks over to this group of Creole-speaking kids, who all sat nearby me so I could hear them pretty clearly. The guy leans over to them and very calmly says, in plain English, "Yes, my dick is huge, and no, your hot teacher ain't gonna suck yours. By the way, I'm your new English teacher, and you'll get detention." They never spoke Creole in class again. Story 3. Oh, the fun I've had being able to speak Indonesian. My family and I, like most Australians, go to Bali and Indonesia quite a bit. I learned the language for 12 years and was fluent enough to pass tertiary entrance exams. The Indonesians just aren't used to tourists making much of an effort to speak their language, so as a consequence, they say a lot. My 2 favorite moments would be from my first trip. We were being driven from our hotel to a really popular restaurant. We were being driven by 3 young guys. They were happily chatting away, blissfully unaware that I understood every word. One of them cracked a joke about taking my mother home. They were very much just cracking a joke, not real ill intent. And when they all laughed, I laughed really loudly. They stopped immediately and said in Indonesian, "How long have you been learning Indonesian?" It was a pretty quiet car ride after that. The other time would be at the markets. I was buying some crappy jewelry from a small stall by the side of the road, and I made a point of bartering in English for a change. In the middle of our transaction, she turns to her daughter, who was sitting next to her in the stall, and says, "Make sure you never barter much when the young ones are alone. They're easier to make more money." To which I said, "Could you please repeat yourself, but slower?" And her face, it was magical. I had never seen someone so shocked. Her daughter ended up giving me the things for their cost price, and we chatted and hung out quite a bit too. All in all, victories all around. Story 4. I speak fluent English and German, plus a few other languages where I can speak the basics. I was sitting in a hot tub while on vacation in California. These 2 German girls came to a little while later and got in the hot tub. The hot tub overlooks the pool and the public beach since the hotel was on the water. I made some small chats in English when they got in and they assumed I only spoke English. So they started talking among themselves in German. They started commenting on people that would walk by with all sorts of things. "I bet she has breast implants. He's probably her mistress," etc. I was just listening and holding anything back. Then they started narrating the seagull who kept asking for scraps and were making some horrible remarks. "Hey, you fat cow. You're already fat enough. Throw me some food, you fatty." They cracked a few good jokes. Considering they were German humor, I still found them really funny. But before I knew it, I lost my shit and started cracking up. They knew instantly. Their faces turned bright red from shame. I just laughed even harder. I then said, "Thanks for the laughs. I'll leave you two. Have a good day," in perfect German. Story 5. I've had a few of these, actually. I speak both English and Dari, and you'd be amazed at the places where you see Afghan people at. One time, I was at Macy's trying to grab a pair of Levi 508s, but they didn't have my size in the color. So in Levi's area, 2 women had Macy's name tags on that were speaking to each other. As I got closer, I noticed that it was Dari but didn't want to say anything. I came up to them and said, "Excuse me, but can you check if you have this in this size?" And one of the ladies turned to the other and said, in Dari, "Wait for a second while I show this idiot we don't have what he wants." I didn't say anything and turns out they did have it in my size, but it was in another spot. Once I grabbed them, I turned to her and said in Dari, "Thank you very much for the help." She and her friend both turned bright red and asked if I was Afghan and apologized multiple times. In the end, they hooked it up with some secret 40% off code, so it all worked out. Another time I really remember was back when I worked at the Apple store. This guy came in, clearly spoke very little to no English, and was trying to explain an issue with his phone. Since there was no one else with him at the time, I had no idea what the other language he spoke and tried to work with him to figure out what the issue was through the broken English and charades. There was actually nothing wrong with the phone. He wanted multitasking and FaceTime, iOS 4, on it, but he had a first-gen iPhone and couldn't get it. Anyways, after about 20 minutes of him telling me, why not work? And me telling him that his phone is too old, he started to get really frustrated. And a bunch of other guys came in and walked up to him. They asked him what was going on and he turned around and said, in Dari of course, these dumbasses working here don't even know how to fix their own product. And ranted on a bit about how none of the workers are above a certain age and how we're all spoiled, etc., etc. So after a little bit of his rant, I stopped him and said in Dari, well, I have been trying to tell you for the past 20 minutes that your phone is too old and will not work, but apparently you don't understand English. There's nothing wrong with your phone, but there is something wrong with you coming here, not speaking any English, then getting angry when you don't understand a response. Much redness and apologies ensued. Story 6. Not me, but my girlfriend. She speaks English and Dutch. There have been numerous times that she has been in England and heard people speaking in Dutch about things you wouldn't usually talk about in public. For example, when she was on the bus, she heard two guys talking behind her describing this lump he'd found in his dick. Now, because they assumed no one could understand them, they were talking at normal levels. I was next to her at the time, and she told me, and I burst out laughing. When we got off the bus, we turned to them and said, "Does," which is bye in Dutch. The look on their faces were brilliant. Story 7. I was on the train in Brisbane on my way home from work. There were some male French tourists on there, plus the usual gaggle of schoolgirls from the local Catholic schools. The guy started talking and pointing to some of the girls, clearly kids in uniform, and saying some disgusting shit along the lines of old enough to f*** and I bet the ones shaves are pussy. Bear in mind these girls are like years 8 to 9, so like 13 to 14 years old, and definitely underage. I was getting increasingly pissed off at the comments and turned to them and yelled in French, "Shame on you, creepy old perverts. I've never seen someone look so shocked in my life." They got off at the next stop, but not before practically melding into the walls. Story 8. Ooh, I have a good one. I'm Asian and I live in France, so my French is pretty fluent, spoken at least. I was visiting some friends in London last summer, and on the tube, there were a group of 5 French tourists standing around and pretty much whining about everyone else in the tube, saying that Brits are so ugly, dissing how they dressed, really petty whining. I was already side-eyeing the crap out of this group, but pretty much kept to myself and my friends. Then the tube started getting really crowded, and we had to move in nearer to said French group. I accidentally bumped shoulders with one of the guys in the group, and he proceeded to groan loudly, then turn to his friends and say, "All these disgusting Asians. They're everywhere. Go back to China. What a witch." His group started laughing and looking at me. At that point, I saw white and completely lost it. I turned around and addressed his whole group, calling them out on their ignorance and racist bullshit, telling them off for being the exact stereotype of French tourists that ruin the reputations of the decent French people out there, and assuming that no one else can speak their language while traveling around in Europe. Ended by saying if you don't want to see any other races or ethnicity, you should probably stay in that hole you call home, and not travel abroad if you're gonna act like a massive douche. Everyone was looking at me at this point. My friends were like, "What?" and trying to get me to stop. I just said loudly in English to everyone else that this group of French people was making racist statements and deserved to be called out. They all pretty much turned red, and one of the other people in the group mumbled a quick apology. They got off the tube at the next stop. Story 9. When my mom was in her 20s, she was in line at a mall and she heard 2 Arabic men behind her making fun of all the slutty American women and talking about her. FYI, she was not dressed badly. She was even super modest by today's standards. But in Saudi, the women cover everything but their eyes. She grew up in Saudi, so she not only spoke the language, but she was very familiar with the beliefs there. She then turned around and chewed them out in Arabic for disrespecting her and told them they should be ashamed for so boldly acting outside of their belief system, at the expense of strangers in a country that does not have the same restrictions. Story 10. In high school, my dad and I went backpacking through the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California. We were in this small town named Lone Pine, which is about 4 hours north of LA. There were tons of German and French tourists there who had been visiting the redwood forests. I speak both English and French fluently, and I overheard these 2 French girls talk about me in a convenience store. One of them nodded in my direction and said, "What about that one?" To which the other one replied, "He seems kind of dumb, but he's cute, so yeah, I'd probably sleep with him." I thought I would try my luck and approach them about it. In French, I said, "So, I'd like to take you up on that offer if you're up to it." They were clearly pretty embarrassed and just walked away giggling. Story 11. Jesus, the French get a bad rap here. Speaking of which, I was in Krakow, Poland with a few friends, all French, including me. Now, Krakow is an amazing city, but one of our friends, actually a friend of you get the idea, was born and raised Parisian. I know it's a stereotype, but they do tend to look down on people, even by French standards. Anywho, there are 5 of us in the tram, standing awkwardly in the middle aisle because all the other seats are taken. We're the only ones standing though, so we attract people's looks to begin with. And for some reason, Paris girl starts rambling about how everyone just looks so depressed and tired here. compared to Paris, which wasn't true at all, and considering our steady diet of just vodka while we were here, we were certainly the most zombie-looking in the bunch. After a while, I say, Paris girl, tune it down. Who are you to say that? What? They can't understand it anyway. Like, they can't. How would you know? And just because they can't understand doesn't mean you get to insult them, jeez. By now I could see a few frowns in our direction, probably from how loud we were. Anyway, Paris girl stops for a bit, and all of a sudden starts again with a massive, loud and clear, they're all ugly anyway. At this moment, two friends of mine and I all at the same time screamed variations of, shut up for the love of God. She did, and I swear that when we got out of the tram, a younger guy sitting looked at me, nodded in approval and mouthed, merci to me. Story 12. My mother is Korean by blood, but was adopted and grew up in the US. When she was in her 20s, she and many other Korean adoptees took a trip to Korea. One day, they were all waiting for a tour when my mother overheard a couple of Korean soldiers talking nearby. They were speaking in English, obviously assuming that no one else there would be able to understand them. They were oogling the women, verbally assessing them and so forth. After speaking explicitly about one of the women in my mom's group, my mom turned around and told them to stop it in English. The looks in their faces were priceless. Story 13. In France, Paris, I was traveling with some friends, also Portuguese, and we ordered in English in that restaurant because I'm the only one who understands a bit of French in that group. And since we saw the tourists talk in English, it was easier for us. Then when eating, we proceeded to talk in Portuguese. Then I heard a regular-looking French family say, damn, Portuguese. They're all dirty and thieves, and so poor. I bet they had to work for like 2 years just to come here. And other insults along the lines that all Portuguese women are prostitutes, etc. When we left, I said in the most perfect French accent I had to the father who was like 30 years old, I was 17 at the time, well, at least Portugal isn't known for surrendering and being rude. Do you want to repeat all you said about my country outside, one-on-one? You should have seen his face. I did not know French people thought of us like that. Seriously. It left me wondering what the hell did we Portuguese people do to be seen like that. Story 14. Although I'm Mexican, Spanish was never that easy to learn. My white friend, who I worked with, actually caught on a lot faster than I did. A pair of Mexicans, mother and son, worked for us well. We always wondered how much bad shit they would say about us. One day, my white friend is trying to learn more Spanish from a few Mexicans who just started working there. When my friend walked away, he noticed that the mother had walked over to the new guy. My buddy decided to nonchalantly mosey his way back over just in time to hear the mom say something along the lines of, don't teach them any Spanish. We don't want them to know when we're talking shit about them. Kinda liked them up until that point. Story 15. I'm bilingual. Dutch, Russian. I live in the Netherlands. I was in St. Petersburg 2 weeks ago. I have a friend who also speaks both Russian and Dutch. We have known each other since we were 2. Our parents are good friends, so they booked flights to Petersburg for the same period. He was staying at his grandma's and me with my grandma. So we were together, buying vodka at some supermarket, we're talking Dutch together, and English to the cashier, just for fun. So all of a sudden I hear 2 girls, 18 years old, talking. They start rating us, and conclude that we are quite cute. They guessed our age to be 19. We are me 15 and he 14. I give the look to my friend. By some kind of best friend telepathy, we decide that I should make the move. So I turn and say in Russian, well girls, you look quite nice too. We can maybe hang out or something. They scream and laugh and accept the invitation. We then went to a cafe and after that to the movies. We still occasionally chat with them. Story 16. Apart from English, I natively speak Italian and Slovenian. The first time I brought my girlfriend to Italy to see where I grew up, the main city I showed her was Venice, as I was born there. There was this one time when we had walked all day in the secret passageways of Venice. So we both were naturally tired and a little sweaty. As we hopped on the train, 2 guys beside us started bashing us too and making fascist comments about us. I wish Mussolini was still here. He would show these wankers to speak their dirty language. Note, my girlfriend doesn't speak Italian, but she does understand a little. Blood boiled up until we stepped off the train as I approached them and loudly said, next time, you should probably keep your neo-fascist and racism comments to yourself. The whole car heard me and immediately turned to look at the blushing guy, who just replied with a yes. Needless to say, I triumphantly walked off the train while my girlfriend turned around towards the windows these guys were sitting at, with a big smile stamped on her face. Story 17. I speak English and French and I live in Quebec. Everyone knows how some French Quebecers don't take too kindly to the English. So I'm at a cafe ordering in English because I'm in between classes and fuck it. It's 7:30 a.m. and latte is pretty much the same in both languages. The cashier looks at me like I had puke all over myself and walks over to her manager and says in French, take care of that Anglo. When will they understand that it's French in this province? At which point I turned bright red and said in French, pardon? Can I not order a coffee without having to have a political debate? Would you not serve travelers or immigrants? Free coffee for a year. Story 18. Went to London with a friend. We're sitting on the metro and we're going to Piccadilly Circus. 2 extremely attractive girls enter the train and sit in front of us. My friend starts telling me in Swiss German how hot they look and all the stuff he would do to them. Pretty graphic shit that he was telling me. The girls start looking at us and I'm telling my friend to be quiet. He keeps talking about all the sexual acts he would do to them until one of the girls replies in a mixture of Swiss German and High German how she understood everything and that he was a swine for saying those things. Very awkward. Never traveled with him again after that. Story 19. My ex speaks pretty good Spanish and enjoys Mexican cuisine. We went to a local Mexican joint pretty regularly, usually twice a month or so. She's incredibly picky and generally a huge cunt about it if they get anything wrong. One day she was going on with her bitching about the service and we got to the register and she heard a waitress mutter something in Spanish. To this day, I have no idea what was said. I asked her, but she wouldn't tell me. But she went full cunt and we didn't have to pay for our meal. Story 20. My buddy is Mongolian and Russian and speaks fluently in both as well as English, but looks entirely Mongolian. We went to Vegas a year ago with another friend who's also Mongolian and hit the tables. They went to play poker together. I just handed my wallet over to the casino. Anyway, they're at the table with two Russian guys who are speaking Russian to each other, basically planning on trying to play with my friends and drive up the bets in an attempt to get their money. My friend hears them and understands what's happening, then tells our other friend what's up in Mongolian. So now they knew they were getting played and decided to play the Russians. They bluffed their way to winning some money until the Russians left, at which time my friend said to them, in Russian, "Good playing with you guys. Take care." The Russian guy's jaw dropped and they left. Story 21. I'm a pretty generic-looking white guy and I used to live in the Southwest. When this happened, I had just gone back from studying abroad in Spain, so my Spanish was, and still is, pretty good. A few of my friends and I, all white dudes, decided to go to Jack in the Box for food one day. We get there, get our food, and eat in a relatively normal fashion. We were one of the few tables in there, and we weren't excessively loud or making a big mess. As we got up to leave, I heard one of the older Hispanic, in all likelihood Mexican, ladies who worked at the restaurant utter something to the effect of "pinche gringos" in Spanish to another employee. All my other friends had pretty much left the building, but since I was the last one out, I heard her mutter it. It pissed me off more than it probably should. Here I was, a white dude trying to learn Spanish when there was no need for me to do so other than me wanting to. If I'm going to take several years of language courses and travel 5,000 miles to a different fucking country to learn Spanish, the least that native speakers can do is not insult me and place me into the white people suck category before talking to me. Some of us crackers do suck pretty bad, but not all of us. I went over to her and motioned for her to come to the counter. I leaned across and said something to the effect of, in Spanish, "Be careful. You never know when a white guy speaks Spanish." Her eyes got really big and her jaw dropped open. She didn't know what to say or do. I just turned and walked out the door. Hopefully she learned her lesson and is either now to be less racist or be more careful about her racism. Probably even more racist because you shamed her.